Hey everyone, and welcome to United Church Online. This last week, we finally did it. We fought off the rain and the cold and met in person at West Queen Anne Playfield. We used a liturgy titled Joy and Sorrow. We had a great conversation around how comforting it is to sit in steadfast joy, a joy that can withstand the sorrow, not dismiss it, not transmute this joy into the guilt of a survivor as if delighting in God's good gifts were somehow a betrayal of our love for the 600,000 people in the U.S. who have died from the coronavirus. I want to read something from the liturgy that we participated in this last week. This sense of returning joy is no offense against their memory. Indeed, it blooms from the very seed of the hope of a world made new and encompasses the expectation of their resurrection and of our own and of our jubilant reunion. And so I will celebrate your goodness in the land of the living. I will delight in this life, even as it is lived in the shadow of death. For a day will come when all your children will rise eternal, taking joy together in these created spaces. Yes, in this age I will mourn with all my heart, and that is right. And yes, I will rejoice with all my heart as well, for that is also right. You, O Christ, have faithfully shepherded me, your child, through the passages of a world broken and fraught with separation and loss. And you have guided me again to the bright remembrance of joy, even of a joy that wells up within my sadness. You have lifted my eyes to the sight of sunlight shafts, piercing the darkness of clouds, gracing in gold a distant hill to which I will inevitably one day come. You have whispered to me again and again that the end is not the end. Throughout the year of 2021, we have committed ourselves to re-Jesusing ourselves using the lectionary as our guide, and today we are in Mark chapter 4. Have you charted your trauma? All of the moments of fear and trepidation, of uncertainty and pain that we were visited upon you in this last year. Trauma is a perpetual experience visited and resisted upon us from year to year, season to season, and even day to day. It affects us more than we know, and in ways that we don't necessarily recognize or see. There are beautiful ways to walk through the wake of trauma that helps to end the cycle and push us forward into the future well. And Jesus shows us the way ahead.
Come close, love. There's something that I want to take a look at together. Are you in a place where you can hear me? Because I want you to really soak in what I have to say. I come offering transformation. I come full of love. And I so deeply want you to experience for yourself what is so often only talked about or imagined. My full presence to all things. My part in your being and your part in my being. I want to clean you up, cut off what no longer serves you, and show you how deeply and truly everything is enjoined to me. What's yours to do is going to sound simplistic, but it's hard. Trust me, I know. People tend to get in their own way when it comes to connection. So what I am asking you is to open, to show me where it hurts. Because right there is where I come in. I am meeting you sore to sore, wound to wound, to nourish you by the intimacy of my own blood and guide you into the mystery and miracle of my deep healing way. I want to bring you closer into me. I want you to experience me and my love firsthand, source to soul. I want you to know that you are soaked in me. You are within my love everywhere, always, and my love is never exhausted. So share the spirit of it freely. Give without worry or desperation. Let love move among you, soul to soul. My heart is set on you. I am here, active and present. I am yours and you are mine. I will never leave you. So trust, remain, rest assured. Be still and know you are within my love, everywhere, always, source to soul, and my love is never exhausted.
Growing up, there was always this song that would get stuck in my head. It was a kid's song, and all week as I've been preparing this message, this song has stayed lodged in my mind. And so I thought I'd share it with you this morning. In fact, gather your kids around because this is a kids' church sort of special number. I mean, it's got hand motions. The lyrics are going to be on the bottom of the screen so that you can follow along, so that your kids can follow along. All right? Are you ready? Have you stretched out? Because seriously, kids' songs always require a bit of stretching and preparation, right? Especially once you get into your 40s. All right, here we go. In the storm, in the storm, in the storm, I am safe in the hands of the Lord. Now make sure you're getting the storm right. I mean, you should all be following along with me here, not just the kids. Everybody does the hand motions. In the storm, in the storm, in the storm, I am safe in the hands of the Lord. I am weak, but he is strong. I'm not scared when he's along. In the storm, in the storm, in the storm, I am safe in the hands of the Lord. There we go. Now that we've got that out of our systems, Jonathan Kumar is going to read our text this morning from the lectionary. It's Mark chapter 4, verses 35 through 41, and the song will definitely make sense.
On that day, when evening had come, he said to them, "Let us go to the other side." And leaving the crowd, they took him with them into the boat, just as he was, and other boats were with him. A great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat, so that the boat was already filling. But he was in the stern, asleep on a cushion. And they woke him and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" And he awoke and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. He said to them, "Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with great fear and said to one another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?"
Thanks, Jonathan. Now, I want to be honest with you. This text frustrates me. That kid's song frustrates me, but perhaps now more than ever. And maybe it does you too. This text, this story, this passage has always been used as a source of encouragement to stay the course and know that Jesus is going to fix it. That if we just wake him up with our pleas and our cries for help, that Jesus will simply wake up and snap his fingers and make everything better. And so we do that. We cry out with our pleas of help, our prayers of desperation, and hope beyond hope that Jesus will wake up, that he'll simply snap his fingers and make it all better. The waters will calm, the winds will cease, and the storm will roll away. But it's been over 15 months now, and I've been praying for Jesus to snap his fingers and make this storm of this pandemic roll away. Have you? And no, I know that as we talk about the pandemic, it's really container language for our own personal experiences. We've all experienced this pandemic storm differently, haven't we? We all have our own traumas and challenges, uncertainties and pains that were visited upon us. And so the language of pandemic is actually just boilerplate. But the experiences inside of us are what are so different. For some of us, we've been touched by death, the loss of friends or family or acquaintances to the coronavirus. Some researchers are saying that more than 1 in 9 people have been deeply affected by the loss of someone to COVID-19. that they are undergoing a deep grief and sense of loss, compounded in many ways by the inability to attend a funeral due to distance, travel restrictions, funeral home restrictions. And that grief there is something that many more have experienced due to the loss of friends and families to other cancers and ailments. This is certainly our story as a family, walking through this loss and an uncertain funeral at the outset of the pandemic. It compounds this grief, this loss, and it piles upon us heavy. For others, it was the loss of work, uncertain finances because the place you work had to shut down, not knowing how you'd be able to pay bills, stay in your apartment, or even eat. As everyone was out talking early about this work from home environment and having parties, these work from home parties, you seethed with the anger at the reality that they were untouched by the storm that you were in. The pandemic wreaked havoc on your finances, and you had to move out. You had to move home. You had to uproot your life completely while others had parties. The storm of this past year took on many different shapes and sizes. Relationships were estranged, altered, upended because of differing expectations of what a COVID pod should look like. Or you felt left out of a pod, alone to struggle and figure this all out by yourself. The relationships you thought you had weren't there when it counted. And so you attempted to navigate the best solutions for you and your family, what was best for you, your child, or your children. You tried and failed over and over and over again, growing more and more uncertain about your abilities as a parent and as a human in this crucible of life with only your family by your side. And yet others of you were excruciatingly lonely, all by yourself. Single, without a roommate, waking up to Zoom meetings on the other side of the country and going to bed after finishing Zoom meetings on the other side of the world. Your only source of connection with another human being was through a screen. You tried this church online thing, but it was just more of the same. More people on a screen and not true connection. You missed the touch of relationship. You needed the reassuring hand on your shoulder. You needed the hug that would tell you that it was okay, that you were loved. You needed physical presence, but you were left with the immense emptiness of loneliness, of silent walls and silent rooms, and so you tried pandemic dating. You tried sharing apartments in a sort of hybrid COVID pod type of thing, just to have another person around, dropping your masks just so that you could be seen, just to be connected with another human being, to stave off this awful loneliness, especially as we entered into those dark and wet winter months. While you saw families drawing nearer to each other, you felt more and more disconnected and alone, counting the months since you'd seen your family last, uncertain about when you'd see them again. We all define this pandemic differently because we have all experienced this pandemic differently. This has not been a one-size-fits-all experience. And as our lives have intertwined and intersected with each other, there's been an underlying frustration with each other, an unspoken frustration laced with judgment, leaving our present realities unsaid, hiding in the recesses of our hearts and minds. And these experiences, they're just the tip of the iceberg, because this doesn't even begin to address the complexities of race, as some of our brothers and sisters within our own community face the fear of even walking outdoors because of the very present reality of the spiking hate crimes in the city directed towards Asians and Pacific Islanders, a more than 61% increase year over year. Their experience in this pandemic, their experience is a dual threat towards life and well-being, an invisible, deadly virus called COVID and the deadly virus of hate called racism. We have all been like the disciples in the boat, running around frantically trying to bail water by ourselves in the midst of the storm, fearing each other, fearing the stranger, fearing for our lives. You see, each of the disciples were experiencing this storm differently too. Peter had family. Matthew probably had a family, a wife and kids that were occupying their mind while they yelled out instructions, feverishly bailing water from the boat as the wind and the waves overtook them. Frustrations abounded, feelings and judgments towards others and how they were or were not handling things, or they rose to this level of rage. You see, some of the disciples, like Peter, were familiar with the Sea of Galilee. They had grown up on the 7-mile wide sea with their fathers, fishing, learning the tricks of the trade, learning how to handle these types of squalls that would appear out of nowhere as the winds would shift radically and create havoc. And I know that some of us have in our minds that they were all on this tiny little boat, almost like a rowboat of sorts, but maybe a little bigger. But they would have been on one of their own actual fishing vessels to cross the sea. We're talking about a big boat, enough for 13, with space for tons of fish and enough space for Jesus to lay down in the back and take a nap. We're talking about a 40, 50, 60, 70-foot boat with a sail and a mast and everything. This wasn't some small vessel in the midst of a gigantic sea. This was a boat, a real boat, a boat big enough for them to run around like chickens with their heads cut off amidst the chaos. And as they're pulling the sails, as they're bailing water, as Peter is leaning into all of his experience, Matthew, who too is thinking about his family, has no clue what to do. You see, Matthew's not a fisherman, not really a man of the sea. He's a money guy, a tax collector. He's good with numbers, not his hands. And you can imagine that he's got this sort of death grip as he sits in the middle of the boat, holding onto ropes, wrapping them around his legs, gazing into the distance and throwing up prayers. He's probably seasick as well at this point. And you can imagine that Peter's pretty frustrated with Matthew. Why isn't he pulling his weight? Why isn't he bailing water like the others? This ship is going to go down, and Matthew isn't even lifting a finger. Even the disciples experienced this storm differently from each other. Our perspective of the storm and the ways we've experienced it are different from each other. And as we begin our slow emergence from this pandemic, as Seattle became the first city in the country to hit the 70% vaccination rate, well done, everyone. We must approach each other with grace and a listening ear. We have to listen to each other's experiences through an ear of love, knowing that we've all been through the ringer, but we've been through the ringer together. And here's the thing, it requires intentionality. We have to ask each other pointedly, what has this year been like for you? And it's a two-way street. We have to ask, and we have to ask each other. Only then will we come to know the complexities we've all endured. Only then will we be able to come back together fully as ourselves, our true selves, our full selves. We're still a couple of months away from being able to be back in person, indoors, fully. And while this pandemic has changed us, while this pandemic has changed our church in tremendous ways, we know that getting back together in person, indoors, we're not going to look the same. We're going to look different because we don't want to go back to the way that things were. We're different people now, a changed people. You see, what I love about this story about the disciples is that eventually, once they hit the end of their knowledge of fishing and boats and storms, they woke Jesus up with a cry for help. But it was a funny cry for help because it was actually laced with a lot of judgment. Jesus, don't you care that we're dying out here? I can imagine them all seething in judgment of Jesus' nap as they worked feverishly to stay afloat. But the reality is they turned to Jesus. As a church, this has been our hope and our work, to continually push us and press us all to turn to Jesus, to center our heart, our mind, our ways around his heart, his mind, his ways. It's why we started this year off centering on the gospel passages in the lectionary, so that we could see the heart, mind, and ways of Jesus in action and learn from them and embody them ourselves. I love that one of our small groups is watching The Chosen together, imbibing the stories of Jesus cinematically, so that they too can more generously and graciously embody the heart, mind, and ways of Jesus. In the midst of the storm, the disciples turned to Jesus. And in the midst of our storm, we too have turned to Jesus. And the stories we've seen unfold in our midst have been nothing short of beautiful. I think of Christy and her experience with the rule and rhythm of fasting we did in the fall and spring. I think of Jen and Nicole and Libby and Kurt and Tracy and so many others and their faithfulness and pressing through the darkness of the pandemic to keep our Thursday night family dinner for Safe Harbor afloat, all embodying the heart, mind, and ways of Jesus as together we've turned towards him and pressed in. I think of Hannah and Eunice and Talissa, how they have led us to better see and understand ourselves in relation to Jesus, challenging us to know that the body and our hearts matter, that what we are feeling and experiencing inside of us is a calling to know and understand ourselves and Jesus more, to slow down, to breathe, to listen to our souls. I think of the liturgies that Trevor has created and walked us through this year, pastoring us well and helping us to center our hearts, our minds, our bodies on Jesus in different ways, and in ways that have been abnormal for many of us, but desperately needed for all of us. I think of Brett and his unbelievable generosity, of Lydia and Taylor and Kristen and their insights and wisdom, how each have shared with this community the brilliant ways in which Jesus has been marking their lives, changing their lives in the midst of this space. I think of our in-person gathering in the park last Sunday and Emma's insights into the goodness of God. This pandemic has been hard, and each of us has our own story to tell of the grueling nature of it all. But each of us, too, has our own story to tell of how taking refuge in the shadow of Jesus has pressed us into a more full way of being. And that's not even to mention beautiful things that have happened, like Blake and Kirsten, after a long and difficult road, about to have their first baby. Or Jonathan and Jackie also announcing a baby coming their way. That Jaiwen passed her CPA exams while also taking care of people in beautiful ways. Or Hannah graduating graduate school again, and Lydia graduating college, and Emma graduating college, and Lyric graduating junior high, and so much more. So much more. As Jesus awoke, he stretched from his slumber, and he rebuked the winds and the wave, and immediately they subsided. Immediately the water was calm, and the wind slowed to a breeze. The disciples looked at one another with astonishment. Who is this, that even the winds and the waves obey him? You are not surprised at the force of the storm, Rilke writes in his poem, Onto a Vast Plain. You are not surprised at the force of the storm. You have seen it growing. The trees flee. Their flight sets the boulevard streaming, and you know he whom they flee is the one you move towards. All your senses sing him as you stand at the window. In the midst of this storm, as everything flees and runs, we knew to whom we should turn. This pandemic has changed us, and it will continue to change us. As long as we maintain our course straight ahead into the arms of Jesus, it will change us in good ways, in beautiful ways, as together each and every one of us pursue the heart, the mind, and the ways of Jesus together. I love this story, that we are found safe in the hands of the Lord. That in the midst of the storm, Jesus has protected us, has cared for us, and carried us along in beautiful and remarkable ways. And there are beautiful stories waiting for us to unearth when we intentionally ask each other, what has this pandemic been for you? May the peace of Christ be with you.